In August 1974, a 25-year-old young woman named Michele headed to the mountains near Creview, Colorado, for a 3-day hike. She was accustomed to traveling alone, taking photographs of the landscapes that the enormous American territory could offer. But on that occasion, she never returned home to develop the images, although the investigation into her disappearance was limited. The citizens of Hannan, the city Michele was from, always wondered what had happened to the woman with braids who traveled as a backpacker in the 70s. In 1992. A county detective decided to reopen the case. She had a hunch that she could finally solve it, but she needed help. She contacted NecroSearch International, a group of archaeologists and other scientists expert in the search for bodies, willing to work without pay just for the sake of helping. To know the truth, these experts knew that several years earlier, a lock of Michele's hair had been found that suggested she had been in a stretch of land on the north slope of the mountain at 3,000 meters high. In August of that same year, NecroSearch volunteers searched the area, and geologist Cecilia Ambrest, who had stepped away to urinate, glimpsed a flash of light. When she approached, she discovered it came from a gold tooth attached to part of a skull. The detective's memory was quickly activated. Michele's father had declared 20 years earlier that his daughter had a tooth exactly like that. It was official. Michele had been the victim of a crime. Now they had to focus on finding her killer, and the police already had a suspect in their sights with several previous cases and accusations to his name. The main suspect of this disturbing crime was named Roy Allen Melanson, born on February 13, 1937. In Broussard, Louisiana, United States. As an adult, Roy became a drifter and began scamming people throughout the country. He was a tall, conventionally unattractive man who believed he had success with women, but in reality, he conquered them through lies and manipulation. In August 1972, his darker side came to light when he attacked a woman named Catherine Au. The encounter began when he offered to help her change a flat tire on her car. He quickly began assaulting her. She tried to defend herself, but he finally managed to control her and continued beating her repeatedly. After the attack, Roy continued committing crimes. Some of his subsequent crimes were robberies and assaults in Orange and Jefferson counties, located in Texas. Subsequently, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison for those crimes, but not even bars could stop him. While imprisoned in Texas, he murdered an inmate, although there is no certain information about this either. The only thing certain is that Roy served only half the sentence for his multiple crimes and regained his freedom, ready to go one step further in the criminal world. Good evening. Welcome to the Nocturnal Criminalist. The case of Anita Faye Andrews. Anita Faye Andrews was 51 years old in 1970. During her youth, she had been a beauty queen at the county fair where she lived. She was a single mother, and to give her son a better life, she had 2 jobs. One of them was at the Napa State Hospital, and the other was at her family's bar, Faye's Cocktail Lounge, which she had inherited along with her sister Muriel after their father's death. The last time Anita was seen alive was on July 10, 1974, after spending the entire night serving at her family's bar. She began cleaning to close and go home, but there was still a stranger lurking outside the place, acting suspiciously. This man was none other than Roy Melanson. The next morning, Muriel entered the establishment and encountered a shocking scene. Her sister's body lay on the floor surrounded by a pool of blood. She had torn clothing, which was evidence of an intimate crime. Once Muriel called the police, the body was transferred to the forensic service. There, doctors determined that Anita had been assaulted, wounded 13 times with a screwdriver, and had her throat cut. Additionally, her gold Cadillac was not found at the bar, so police presumed the killer had stolen it done at the crime scene. The criminal had left several clues: a cigarette butt in an ashtray, a partially bloody fingerprint on a back staircase, fingerprints on a bottle, and an open cash register. Despite having all these pieces of evidence in their favor, the police could not find the killer. This gave Roy the confidence to strike again. The case of Michele Cecile Wallace. The next victim of this serial killer was Michele Cecile Wallace, born on April 13, 1949, in Cook County, Illinois, United States. Shortly after, her family moved to the city of Chicago, where Michele spent her entire childhood. She was a very active girl who loved swimming and used to spend time with her parents, George and Margaret, and a brother named George Jr. After graduating from Riverside Brookfield High School in 1967, Michele traveled to Africa and Spain. She then returned to the United States to attend Utah State University, but after completing 2 years of studies, she decided to drop out and completely change her life. She moved to Aspen, Colorado, where she could practice skiing. This sport had become her favorite pastime. To earn money, Michele worked as a road worker, as this allowed her to enjoy nature. In her free time, she took photographs and still lifes. She also enjoyed traveling with Oki, her companion dog, a German shepherd that provided her protection against strangers. One of Michele's favorite places was West Gunnison. She loved the mountains and residential areas of that city. She took advantage of every opportunity. She had to take photos of everything she saw there. Her mother, Margaret, had grown up during the Great Depression and always wanted to travel but couldn't afford it. She was accustomed to home life, but supported her daughter's traveling adventures, even helping her plan her trips and enjoying experiencing them indirectly. Her father, George, for his part, had worked in the restaurant sector and eventually opened his own pizzeria. Despite being a businessman, he was impressed by how brave and outgoing Michele was. By 1974, Michele had already made some friends in her new city. While her old friends were graduating from university or starting families, she dedicated herself to her work and hobbies, skiing, skydiving, and solo backpacking trips. However, wherever she went, she found a way to call her parents almost daily. Michele and her mother even accumulated enormous phone bills. By then, the young woman was 25 years old, worked as a freelance photographer, and hoped to turn this into her full-time profession. She especially enjoyed portraying children and had also begun exploring landscape and nature photography. In August 1974, Michele told her parents she was going on an excursion with her dog to the Rocky Mountains, completely alone. While her parents were accustomed to her traveling on her own, it was not usual for her not to call them. When days passed and Michele didn't call to tell them she was okay, all alarms went off. Margaret and George reported Michele's disappearance to the police, but the officers refused to attend to them, arguing that Michele was an adult woman, and that going a few days without contacting her parents shouldn't be cause for concern. However, Margaret assured them that her daughter used to contact them up to 3 times a day, so for contact to cease so abruptly was unusual. She sensed it could be a disappearance or worse, a murder. Finally, the police agreed to take the report and mobilized a search team that combed the mountainous lands on foot, by truck, on horseback, and from the air, but they found no trace of Michele or her truck, a red Mazda. Although the first clue didn't take long to arrive. Chuck Matthews, a ranch owner, informed the police that he was sure Michele was the woman who offered to give him and another man a ride. His companion's name was Roy, although he didn't know his last name and had met him just a few days before at the Columbian Bar, located on a rural road near Gunnison. On August 30th, both men took a road trip to visit a man who supposedly owed Roy money, but Chuck's car broke down in the middle of the route. It was then that Michele appeared driving her truck and offered to take them to their destinations. Chuck accepted, and Roy claimed he needed a ride because he was experiencing problems with his own car. This puzzled Chuck, since Roy had previously told him he didn't own any type of vehicle. But Chuck preferred not to inquire and got in along with his new friend into Michele's truck. Roy sat in the passenger seat, and Chuck sat in the back seat with Okie Dot after Michele dropped Chuck off at the Colombian bar. She continued driving while Roy remained in the passenger seat. After that, Chuck never saw the young woman and his new friend again. The police managed to find a man who matched the physical description that Chuck had provided of the suspect in Pueblo, Colorado. His name was Roy Allen Melanson, and he was a drifter who had already served time for an assault case in Texas. They just had to catch him and obtain a statement. In September 1974, Roy was arrested in Pueblo, Colorado, while he was parked in front of a local high school. When a detective searched his car, he found Michele's license plate and key. He also recovered a receipt from a pawn shop detailing Michele's professional camera and accessories. They also found a roll of film that included photos of residents of Denver, Gunnison, and Oklahoma. Finally, they discovered that Roy had Michele's backpack, her driver's license, and a receipt for a sleeping bag. He had possibly sold her other camping things as well, since in total, Michele's belongings had earned him $73.75. In reality, Roy was broke and homeless, so his lie provided him with a place to sleep, at least temporarily. But Roy didn't work much, especially after meeting a woman named Lucy Burton and her 5 daughters. Her husband was in Pueblo while Lucy and her daughters spent their vacation in a cabin. Roy became close to all of them. On one occasion, he took a friend of the girls on a horseback ride. When the girl returned to the Burtons' cabin, she was quiet and strange. During the investigation, it was learned that Roy had assaulted her during that horseback ride. Eventually, he was fired from the ranch where he worked because he really didn't perform any tasks. He then moved in with the Burtons and began spending a lot of time with Sally, Lucy's 14-year-old daughter. During the following weeks, Roy assaulted her repeatedly. On August 29th, Roy entered the Colombian bar and befriended Chuck Matthews, that local ranch worker, and told him he had a cabin with horses. He asked for help getting rid of some bears, and Chuck accepted. They went in Chuck's car to the Burtons' cabin, but simply fell asleep. The next day, Roy told Chuck that the horses actually belonged to a man who had rented them to him but never returned. He asked him to take him to that alleged man's house to pick up the horses and some money the man would pay him. Along the way, both stopped to drink at a bar, and Roy said he didn't remember where the man's cabin they were supposed to visit was located. Additionally, Chuck's car broke down. At that moment, Roy got out of the car with a rifle, supposedly to hunt bears, but then changed his mind. Chuck assured that he had probably been planning to kill him. When they got back in, they encountered Michele, who was returning from a backpacking trip. She was driving and was eager to go to North Carolina, where she would have her first job as a professional photographer. But first, she had to return to Gunnison. It was then that she glimpsed a broken-down car on the road with 2 men outside. She offered a ride to both men, and after dropping Chuck off again at the Colombian bar, she and Roy continued. From that moment, no one saw her again. Based on forensic studies, investigators believed that once Roy had Michele alone in the car, he forced her to stop and let the dog out. Then he tried to have relations with her, but Michele resisted. Then he attacked her, although no one could determine exactly with what he did it. From the tears in her clothing, it was presumed he assaulted her. He then killed her and threw her lifeless body down a mountain slope. Her bone remains were found in the same position she had fallen after Roy threw her. With Michele lifeless, no one reported the disappearance of her car, so Roy used it as if it were his own without worrying, at least until the police questioned him about it. In September 1993, the trial against Roy Allen Melanson began. The accused refused to attend because he didn't want to wear an electric belt that would prevent him from escaping. The evidence was based mainly on hair samples collected from the victim's scalp. These and the bones found on the mountain slope or displayed in showcases. Roy appeared in person only for the reading of the sentence. "I don't know what you expected your lawyers to do, to perform miracles," said District Court Judge Richard Brown. "You are a waste of humanity," he added. Later, Roy Melanson was then declared guilty and sentenced to life in prison for Michele's murder. This sentence he could serve only after finishing his 20 years in prison for the Kentucky robbery. After the sentence, Roy Melanson repeatedly argued before the parole board that his conviction was illegal because the cause of death could not be determined due to the state of Michele's remains. However, the request was denied on all occasions. Michele's father agreed with the conviction of his daughter's killer, but unfortunately, his wife did not improve from then on. In April 1994, on the day Michele would have turned 45, she was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery. Her remains rest next to those of her mother. Her father, George, had retired to St. Petersburg, Florida in 1977 and later remarried, but in the early 2000s, his second wife died. As if this weren't enough, on January 13, 2006, a new tragedy struck. The Wallace family. Two thieves broke into George's house. Eugene Wesley, 17 years old, covered the man who was then 85 years old, frail, and used a wheelchair with a blanket. Then Stephen M. Sterling, 21 years old, brutally beat him with a blunt object. They stole George's car, but almost no other valuable objects. The man died from his injuries in the hospital. The police quickly arrested Wesley and Sterling. The latter was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole and transferred to the Sewanee Correctional Institution annexed. Eugene, 4, his part, cooperated with the authorities and testified against Sterling, therefore receiving 25 years in prison for second-degree murder and dangerous act. He was taken to Liberty Correctional Institution in Bristol, Florida. The victim's other son, George Jr., was left alone. "We are an unfortunate family," he declared to the Tampa Bay Times. "Two murders so far apart and one suicide is really difficult to understand," he expressed. Meanwhile, Roy Melanson continued paying the consequences of his ruthless acts. In 2000, a newly enacted federal law forced him to provide his DNA for testing. Then authorities had the opportunity to solve the other murders he had always been suspected of for so many years. His genetic profile connected him to the homicides of Charlotte Sauerwein and Anita Faye Andrews in 2010. However, he was only tried for the first one in 2011, receiving a new life sentence. Since then, American law enforcement agencies began reviewing their unsolved cases, hoping to be able to link Roy Melanson to them. However, the killer was uncooperative with the police and continued trying to request parole. Before the Colorado Supreme Court, he argued that he should be released on parole to a nursing home to live out the rest of his days. Additionally, he declared that he did not murder Michele and affirmed that there were no arrest warrants from other jurisdictions that would prevent them from releasing him. Despite this, the board did not let him go, while Pauline Klump's remains were never found. Due to her husband's statement, Detectives were sure that Roy Melanson had murdered her. The killer spent his last years in poor health, confined to a wheelchair, and died on May 22, 2020, while serving his sentence. Strangely, his death was not announced until 2021, when the Napa District Attorney's Office called the prison to verify his status. Roy Melanson departed from this world without being convicted of many murders he was clearly guilty of, or at least that's what the testimonies and evidence indicated. He didn't even have the decency to tell the families of his victims where many of the bodies were, leaving the detectives who followed his trail with a question: how many people did this individual really murder? Dear audience, I thank you for your company. Thank you for accompanying me in this new broadcast. If today's case seemed interesting and informative to you, I ask you to give me a like or a comment about tonight's broadcast. I bid you farewell, not without first thanking you for your company. And remember, if you're not yet subscribed, I cordially invite you to do so and become part of this great community. This is the Night Criminalist. Until the next broadcast. Finally, they discovered that Roy had Michelle's backpack, a driver's license, and a receipt for her sleeping bag. He had possibly sold her other camping things as well, since in total, Michelle's belongings had earned him $73.75. After discovering this, investigators managed to find the camera. They then developed the film that Roy possessed. It had photos that Michele had taken of Oki still with the hiking backpack. There was also an image of Roy relaxing with an unidentified young woman who was not Michele. He had possibly asked someone else to take it before selling the camera. A week later, Oki entered a farm and received a fatal shot from a rancher, who claimed to have been protecting his cattle. He was identified by the tag he was wearing, and there was still no news of Michele. During interrogation, Rui, who at that time worked for a sheep rancher, claimed that he and Michele had stopped for coffee. He took advantage of that moment to escape and steal Michelle's car. He then abandoned it in Amarillo, Texas. He accepted being guilty of theft, but claimed to have nothing to do with the young woman's disappearance. Shortly after, the police located Michelle's car, but found no signs of violence inside. Despite Roy's highly suspicious behaviors, the police found no concrete trace of Michele. Without that, they couldn't prove that a murder had been committed. The case was filed away, and the police could only charge Roy with fraud, check theft, and breaking and entering. Shortly after his daughter's disappearance, George suffered another terrible tragedy. His wife Maggie expressed on several occasions that she couldn't bear living without Michele, and the situation escalated. One morning upon waking, George discovered that his wife lay lifeless beside him. She had taken her own life by consuming almost an entire bottle of barbiturates. In her farewell note, she requested that if Michelle's remains appeared, they'd bury her next to her dot in 1975. Roy was extradited to Texas for an assault trial and received a life sentence that was subsequently reduced. He got out of prison again in March 1988, and far from reforming, he prepared to hunt his next victim. The case of Pauline Klump, 51 years old, was renting a house to Roy along with her ex-husband and his new partner in the Port Arthur area in Port, Texas. One day in 1988, she asked Roy for help with her air conditioner and also asked him to pick up a television she had bought. Pauline and Roy were seen together for the last time, and after that, the woman mysteriously disappeared. Pauline's then-husband was out of town for work, staying in a Galveston hotel, but traveling regularly to make sure she was okay. When several days passed and he received no call from Pauline, the man decided to return home. There, he encountered a strange scene. He found a pot with stew on the stove that had apparently been cooking for days. There was no trace of Pauline. 4 days after her disappearance, they found the woman's car behind a grocery store with the television that Roy was supposed to help transport still inside. Detective Scott Gaspard, in charge of solving Pauline's case, said from the first moment that Roy was the main suspect in the young woman's disappearance. However, he was not arrested, and the case was filed and left unsolved. A few months after Pauline's disappearance, Roy traveled to Walker, a small town east of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. On August 5, 1988, while he was in a laundromat, he heard a conversation that caught his attention. Charlotte Sauerwin, 24 years old, was talking about how long it was taking her fiancé Vincent Legend to save money to buy land for their house. At that moment, Roy intervened, introducing himself as a land developer with a sensible and economical offer. Charlotte chatted animatedly with whom she believed was a friendly businessman, but when the other people left the laundromat, Roy sprang into action. He attacked, assaulted, and tortured Charlotte before killing her. When finished, he tied a strap around her neck and dragged the body near a shed where he abandoned it. A month after Pauline's disappearance, the Livingston Parish, Louisiana police found Charlotte's body. Forensic studies indicated she had been brutally mistreated. Despite the clear presence of a dangerous criminal in the area, something even more notorious would have to happen for Roy to be in the police's focus, and many years would pass before that happened. Meanwhile, Michele's disappearance remained an unsolved case. In June 1979, 5 years later, a married couple and their friends found a pair of braided ponytails bleached by the sun less than a mile from their cabin. Michele used to wear a similar hairstyle, so the police kept the hair remains to analyze them. When they had the young woman's DNA. In 1989, police investigator Kathy Harlian reopened the case. The more she investigated it, the more she believed it had a solution. She declared to the Associated Press that she sent hair from Michele's brush to compare it with the braided lock of hair. The study showed they were similar, but this finding didn't provide new clues about the young woman's whereabouts or about the identity of the alleged killer. In 1992, Harlian contacted NecroSearch International, a group of scientists expert in the search for bodies who were also willing to work for free. The vegetation found in Michele's hairlock provided them with some clues. It indicated that the body must have been at 3,000 meters high, more specifically in a stretch of land on the north slope of the mountain. Therefore, in August of that same year, NecroSearch moved to that site. At one point, geologist Cecilia Ambrest stepped away to urinate and glimpsed a gold tooth. It was attached to part of a skull that had been bleached by the sun. The cold case unit didn't take long to remember that 20 years earlier, the young woman's father had declared to the police that his daughter had a gold tooth that she received during a dental procedure. Michele's dental history was then reviewed, and it could be verified that the gold tooth found attached to the skull matched her DNA. Shortly after, more bone remains were found on a slope in a position that indicated to the search team that the victim had been thrown. These new remains also showed a match with Michele's genetic profile. The NecroSearch team also discovered remains of her clothing, including jeans with a zipper that seemed to have been violently torn off, and they also found underwear and a mountain boot with bone remains and a human foot. The evidence was examined and confirmed to belong to Michele. Finally, a hairbrush found in Michele's backpack that contained long locks of hair and the bristles was analyzed. Forensic tests revealed they matched the sun-bleached ponytails found 18 years earlier by that couple who was touring. An autopsy was finally performed on Michele's bone remains, but the flesh of the body had been corroded, so the cause of death could not be determined, and the case was far from being solved. The testimony related by the rancher in 1974 showed that Roy was the only suspect in the crime, so they just had to find him, and the detectives were lucky. Roy had been arrested in Kentucky in January 1992 for unrelated theft charges. He was still serving the sentence in a prison in that state when the police went looking for him. They asked the authorities for his extradition to Colorado for a trial for Michele's murder, and it was granted. To the rancher's testimony was added that of a former cellmate of Roy's named John Paul Steele. He declared to the authorities that Roy had admitted to hiding a body in the mountains. As if this weren't enough, other ex-inmates told Harlan that Roy boasted about having killed an uncooperative woman. Before beginning the trial, the police carried out a reconstruction of what they believed had happened during Michele's disappearance and subsequent murder. But they also learned of other crimes that Roy had committed during his stay in Colorado. In August 1974, Roy arrived in Grand County, Colorado, introducing himself as an experienced sheep herder. A local farmer trusted his word and hired him to hunt mountain lions and coyotes that were killing his flock.